The gym was almost empty, the sound of gloves hitting punching bags echoing faintly in the background. When a young martial arts black belt named Ryan finished his practice session with a group of friends, his uniform still crisp and his confidence shining through every movement. And as he laughed loudly with his teammates about their progress, his eyes suddenly fell on the janitor sweeping the far end of the mats, a quiet black man named Samuel, who worked there every evening after closing hours. Someone, most of them, hardly noticed, yet tonight Ryan felt an odd urge to speak, half from pride and half from curiosity, and with a grin he called out, asking Samuel if he wanted to spar, just for fun, the words hanging in the air like a playful challenge, but also tinged with arrogance. And his friends burst into laughter, thinking the idea was ridiculous, because how could a janitor, dressed in old work clothes and holding a mop, have anything to do with martial arts? But to their shock, Samuel paused, set aside his broom, and looked straight at Ryan with calm/steady eyes before nodding, saying softly that he would spar if Ryan truly wanted it, and immediately the laughter stopped, replaced by a silence that thickened the room with surprise, because nobody expected him to accept, and Ryan felt his own smile falter for a moment, though pride pushed him forward as he agreed, waving his friends to clear the mats. And within minutes the gym that was supposed to be closing had become a small arena, with curious eyes watching, whispers running through the group about whether this would be quick and humiliating or simply amusing. And Ryan, stretching his shoulders, reminded everyone that he was a black belt and this was only going to be fun. Yet deep inside he felt a strange uneasiness, not because of Samuel's size or age, but because of the way he had accepted without hesitation. And as Samuel stepped onto the mat, no martial arts uniform, no gloves, just a quiet composure in his stance, it created an unexpected tension that made even the air feel heavy. For there was something about his silence that unsettled Ryan more than trash talk ever could. And as both men stood facing each other under the flickering lights, one young and full of energy, the other older, calm and unreadable, the crowd leaned in, sensing that this would not be the meaningless joke they first thought, but rather the beginning of something none of them had imagined. A challenge that might not only test Ryan's skills, but uncover a story hidden behind the janitor's quiet eyes, a story waiting to reveal itself through the clash of movement and the silent language of discipline. The mats creaked beneath their feet as Ryan circled slowly, his eyes scanning Samuel for any hint of hesitation, while his friends whispered, nervously from the sidelines, their earlier laughter replaced with a growing curiosity. And with a sudden burst of confidence, Ryan stepped forward, throwing a quick jab meant to test the janitor's reaction. But Samuel did not flinch. Instead, he shifted slightly to the side with such smooth precision that the punch sliced through the empty air, leaving Ryan off balance for a fraction of a second, and though it was small, everyone watching noticed it. For the janitor's movement had been too calm, too practiced, like someone who had done this many times before. And Ryan tried to laugh it off, saying it was just the beginning. But the truth was his heart beat faster, not from the exertion, but from an unsettling feeling that he was being read like an open book. And he pressed forward again with a flurry of strikes, quick combinations that usually forced opponents back. Yet Samuel blocked each one with minimal effort, his hands moving gracefully, his body flowing like water, never rushed, never panicked. And the more Ryan attacked, the more it seemed like Samuel was simply guiding him, letting him throw everything but never finding a single target. And whispers from the crowd grew louder, their eyes widening as they began to realize this was no coincidence. That the janitor was not merely dodging but controlling the rhythm of the match without even striking back. And Ryan, sweating now, felt frustration creep in, determined to prove himself, so he spun into a powerful kick aimed at Samuel's side. But in an instant, Samuel shifted again, his hand lightly tapping Ryan's shoulder as he moved past him. Not enough to hurt, but enough to show he could have ended the fight if he wanted. And that single touch sent a shiver down Ryan's spine because it was not brute strength that he felt, but mastery, a level of control he had never experienced even against seasoned fighters. And the gym fell completely silent except for the sound of Ryan's heavy breathing, his earlier arrogance slipping into uncertainty, and Samuel, still calm, finally spoke a few quiet words, telling Ryan to breathe, to slow down, that fighting was not always about force but about understanding. And though his voice was soft, it carried a weight that silenced everyone further, as if wisdom itself had spoken. And Ryan hesitated, torn between his pride and his respect for what he was witnessing. But his pride won for now, pushing him to launch another desperate series of moves, faster, sharper, meant to break through the wall that Samuel's calmness had built. Yet every strike only revealed more clearly that the janitor was not an ordinary man, that beneath his quiet job sweeping floors lay a hidden past written in skill and discipline. And as the minutes stretched on, the balance of power shifted, for it was no longer Ryan testing Samuel, but Samuel testing Ryan, pushing him not with blows, but with patience, forcing him to confront his own weaknesses. And everyone watching knew deep down that something extraordinary was happening before their eyes. that this was no simple spar for fun, but the unfolding of a story that had been hidden in silence for far too long. And as Ryan stumbled back, gasping for air, Samuel finally adjusted his stance, his eyes locking with Ryan's in a way that made the young fighter freeze, for it was the look of a true master preparing to reveal just enough of his strength to change the course of the match, and perhaps the course of Ryan's understanding forever. The crowd held their breath as Samuel finally stepped forward, his calm expression unbroken. And though he had said nothing yet, the weight of his silence carried a strange authority that made Ryan pause for the first time, wiping the sweat from his forehead as if trying to shake off the tension pressing down on him. But what nobody in the gym realized was that Samuel's stillness was not only about the sparring match, it was about years of discipline buried under a quiet life he had chosen to live far from attention. And as Ryan caught his breath, he dared to ask who Samuel really was, his voice trembling not with anger, but with curiosity. And in that moment, Samuel lowered his hands, easing out of his stance, and told them in simple words that once upon a time he had been trained by masters far away, that he had studied not only the art of fighting, but the art of peace. And though the words were plain, they carried a mystery that pulled everyone closer. Their eyes locked on a man they thought they knew, yet clearly had never understood. And Samuel's story began to unfold in fragments. How as a young man he had left his small hometown with nothing but determination. How he had lived in places where discipline was stricter than comfort, where dawn was greeted not with rest but with endless practice, where bruises were part of learning and silence was part of strength. And Ryan listened in awe, as Samuel spoke not with pride but with humility, as if the story belonged to someone else. And it was then that the young fighter realized the janitor's movements had not been luck but the result of a life shaped by hardship and perseverance. A life Ryan could not imagine while living his own world of trophies and competitions. And Samuel revealed that he had once fought in tournaments not for fame but for survival, because back then his world demanded it. Yet even in the noise of victory he had found no true purpose, and one day he walked away, leaving behind recognition and choosing a path where no one would chase him, where he could serve quietly, sweeping halls instead of chasing glory. And when someone in the crowd asked why he would ever give up such talent, Samuel smiled faintly and said that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to stop fighting, that real power is not in defeating others but in mastering yourself. And those words echoed across the gym like a bell, sinking into the hearts of everyone present, even those who had come only to be entertained. And Ryan's pride weakened, replaced by a strange respect that burned deeper than admiration. For in Samuel, he saw not a janitor but a man who had chosen a life most people would never understand. And the more Samuel spoke, the more Ryan realized that his own journey had been too focused on medals and praise, that he had forgotten what the essence of martial arts was meant to be. And Samuel, seeing the change in Ryan's eyes, gently told him that every fighter reaches a point where he must ask himself why he fights, whether it is to prove something to others or to understand something within. And the gym fell silent again, the sound of those words heavier than any punch, for they revealed a truth larger than the spar, a truth that touched not only Ryan but even the onlookers who came to mock the janitor at first. And as the story lingered in the air, Samuel's presence shifted, no longer the humble worker in faded clothes, but a man whose quiet life carried wisdom far greater than any title. And Ryan, still catching his breath, felt for the first time that he was in the presence of someone who could change him, not through force but through truth. And in that silence, Samuel looked around at the faces staring back at him, young and old, eager and doubtful, and said softly that every person has a hidden past, a journey unseen by others. And sometimes the greatest stories belong to those who sweep floors and stand unnoticed. And in that instant, the atmosphere in the gym transformed. For the match was no longer about who would win or lose, but about what could be learned. And though the spar was not over, Ryan lowered his fists, uncertain if he should continue, while Samuel waited patiently, ready to show him that the real test was not in the fight but in what came after. And everyone knew without speaking that the hidden past they had just heard was only the beginning of what Samuel still had to teach. The air in the gym felt heavier than before, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. And though Samuel had shared pieces of his past, it was the way he carried himself afterward that made everyone look at him differently. For respect is not demanded but earned. And in that moment, even Ryan, the proud black belt, felt his ego shrink beneath the quiet strength of the janitor. Yet there was still a tension in the room, an unspoken need to see whether words and wisdom could stand beside skill. So Ryan raised his hands again, this time not with arrogance, but with respect, bowing low to Samuel in the traditional gesture of honor. And that simple act caught the attention of every student and parent watching, for they could see in Ryan's eyes that this was no longer about testing an old man but about learning from him. And Samuel, recognizing the sincerity, returned the bow with a calm nod, then slowly lifted his hands into a stance so refined, so balanced, that even the most experienced martial artists in the room leaned forward to study it. And what followed was not a fight but a lesson woven into movement. As Ryan attacked with precision, yet each strike was deflected effortlessly, Samuel moving not with force but with grace, as if he were guiding the energy away rather than resisting it, and the more Ryan pushed, more he realized that brute strength and speed were powerless against control and wisdom. And though his heart raced and sweat poured from his brow, there was no frustration, only wonder, because for the first time in his life he felt he was standing before a true master, one who fought not for victory, but for truth. And the students watching began to whisper, their eyes wide with amazement, until even the whispers faded into silence as they saw Ryan, the undefeated competitor, humbled before the janitor, who never bragged about what he could do. And when Samuel finally stopped, placing a gentle hand on Ryan's shoulder, it was clear that the spar had ended not because one had defeated the other, but because the lesson had been given. And Ryan, breathing hard, bowed once again, deeper than before, not out of obligation, but from genuine respect, while Samuel simply smiled and stepped back, returning to the man everyone thought he was, quiet and unassuming. But the room no longer saw him that way, for in their eyes he had transformed into something far greater, a teacher who carried his wisdom not in titles or uniforms but in his very being. And as the students slowly approached, some asking questions, others just staring in awe, Samuel reminded them that martial arts was never about showing off, but about building character, discipline, and heart. And those words struck deeper than any punch, settling into minds young and old alike. Even the parents who had come to watch their children now looked at him with admiration, whispering about how much there was to learn beyond the surface of belts and trophies. And Ryan, standing among them, felt both humbled and grateful, for he understood that respect was not something he could earn through fear or dominance, but something he had to give freely when he recognized greatness in another. And so he turned to Samuel and asked softly if he would teach him, not as a competitor seeking advantage but as a student seeking truth. And the gym gasped at the sight of the proud fighter, lowering himself before the janitor. Yet Samuel did not hesitate. He placed a hand over Ryan's fist and said that every person he met in life could be both a teacher and a student, and that the path of learning never ended. And in that moment, a bond was formed, one built not on pride but on mutual respect. And the story of what had just happened spread beyond the walls of the gym, whispered in conversations, repeated with awe, until people who had never even met Samuel began to speak of the day when a black belt bowed to a janitor, not out of defeat but out of honor. And though Samuel returned to his quiet duties, sweeping floors and fixing small things around the building, everyone who saw him afterward looked at him differently, not with pity or indifference but with gratitude, for they understood that greatness often hides in the most ordinary places, waiting to be seen by those willing to look closer. And Ryan, who once thought victory was everything, now carried himself differently, to his shoulders no longer heavy with pride but lighter with humility, for he had learned in one unforgettable day that respect is not given to those who demand it but to those who deserve it. And Samuel, the man who had hidden his past, had finally revealed enough to change not only one fighter's heart but an entire community, proving that sometimes the most life-changing lessons come from those least expected. And the quiet janitor had earned not just respect, but something far greater. He had earned a place in their hearts. The gym was quieter than usual the next morning, yet there was an unspoken energy lingering in the air, for the story of what had happened between Ryan and Samuel had spread so quickly that everyone who entered looked around with a mix of curiosity and respect. And when Samuel walked in carrying his mop and bucket, the students who once ignored him now greeted him warmly, some even bowing slightly as if he were already their teacher, which made Samuel chuckle softly but also stirred something inside him, because for years he had hidden his past, locking away the fighter and mentor he once was, but now it seemed destiny had pulled him back into the light. And as Ryan stepped into the gym, no longer with the arrogant swagger he once carried but with calm humility, everyone turned to see what he would do, and without hesitation he approached Samuel and bowed deeply, his voice steady but filled with sincerity as he asked once again to be taught. And this time Samuel did not brush him off or try to walk away. Instead, he studied the young man's eyes, searching for pride or selfishness, but found only honesty. And after a long pause, he gave a small nod that made Ryan's face light up with relief, and the room erupted in whispers, for it was clear that something extraordinary was beginning. Yet before any words of teaching could be shared, Samuel gathered all the students together and told them a story about his younger days, about how he once trained under a master who had taught him that strength without discipline was dangerous, that skill without humility was empty, and that the true heart of martial arts was not winning but building character. And as he spoke, his voice carried a weight that silenced even the restless children, for they understood that these were not empty words but truths forged in experience. And when he finished, he turned to Ryan and said that the bond between teacher and student was not about power but about trust, and that if Ryan wished to learn, he must first promise to use his skill, not to dominate but to protect. And Ryan, overwhelmed with gratitude, gave his word in front of everyone, sealing a bond that was not just personal but witnessed by the entire community. And from that day forward, the two trained together in quiet corners of the gym, sometimes early in the morning before others arrived, sometimes late at night when the lights were dim. And though Samuel never raised his voice or showed off, his lessons were deep and transformative, teaching Ryan patience, control, and awareness. And the more Ryan learned, the more he realized that fighting was the least important part of martial arts, that what mattered most was how a person carried themselves outside the ring, how they treated others, and how they responded in moments of conflict. And this change in Ryan began to ripple outward. For the other students saw their once proud champion becoming humble and respectful, and they too started to carry themselves differently, listening more, learning deeper, and treating Samuel with the honor he deserved, until the gym itself seemed to transform into something more than a place of training. It became a place of growth, of family, of connection, and though Samuel never sought recognition, it became clear to everyone that he was no longer just a janitor. He was their guide, their quiet master, and their friend. Yet what made this bond so powerful was not the techniques or the lessons alone, but the humanity behind it. For Ryan often stayed behind after training to ask Samuel about his life, about the struggles he faced, and Samuel, though reserved, began to open up little by little, sharing how he once had dreams of becoming a teacher full-time, but life's hardships had pulled him away. And Ryan listened with respect, feeling not pity, but admiration for a man who had endured so much, yet carried himself with grace. And over time, their bond grew so strong that even those outside the gym noticed. Parents spoke of how their children came home more disciplined and kind. Local people began to mention the janitor who had changed the gym spirit, and slowly, a quiet legend was forming. Yet Samuel never let it go to his head, reminding everyone that true greatness was measured not by what others said but by the choices they made each day. And in this bond, Ryan found not only a teacher but a father figure he never knew he needed, while Samuel found not only a student but a chance to continue his purpose, a second chance at the life he thought he had lost. And though the world outside might never fully know the depth of their story, those who witnessed it would never forget, for it was a reminder that respect could bridge any gap, that wisdom could come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest changes in life began with a single moment of humility. And so, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, a new chapter truly began, not just for Ryan and Samuel but for everyone around them, proving that when respect and trust form the foundation of a bond, it can change not only to lives but the world around them in ways no one could have ever predicted.